Okay, so this is not a final list of hotkeys. This is the one that the test will be based off of. There won't be any additional ones outside of this on the test. Anything that we kind of go through where you see, hey, we're using the D key to extrude stuff, or we're using the M key to open up the modeling menu, you may want to just jot those down, but those ones just won't be on the test, okay? These ones here, the way the test is going to be organized is that it's going to be a multiple choice, or a matching, that's what it is, a matching. So under File, you'll see that there are 5 different things here. So you'll match New Scene to one of these hotkeys. You'll match Open Scene to one of these hotkeys. You'll match Save Scene to one of those hotkeys. And then for objects, the same thing. It'll be all of these ones listed here, and then you'll match each one of those, okay? So they'll already be kind of separated, so it makes it a little bit easier. A lot of these are kind of repetitive. You know, these 3 especially, you should have been doing your entire life on computers. Control N, O, and S are typical, like, across the board things. These ones we use every single class, or we should be using them every single class. Some of these we haven't touched yet. We will play with them. I just want to get to them eventually, okay? So we're going to just go through these and make sure that you can see exactly what they do and maybe connect it visually to what is happening. So I'm just going to hide that there and put this here. Perfect. Okay. So Control N is just a new scene. So we have a project or we have a scene open right now. If I hit Control N, it just makes a new one. Now with Cinema, it allows you to make new documents inside of new documents. So some softwares don't allow you to do that. Like Maya, I can't make a new document without closing the old one. This one does. So if I went to Window, you can see here's Untitled 2, and if I went to Control N and I hit it a few times, under my window, hey, where'd you go? Oh, I probably have to create something. Create object, cone. And then I went to New, and then it should show, there it is, Untitled 8 and Untitled 7. So you can see how I have 2 different documents open. Control O is just open scene. Control S is to save scene. Control Shift S is save scene as. There's another one that typically should have a hotkey, which is save incremental. That would be a great one because it's very easy to just hit save and overwrite that same file every time. And then what happens is that file gets corrupt and you have to go back and redo all of your stuff, okay? So save incremental will just add a number to it. So if this is version 1, it'll save it to version 2 and 3 and so on. Control D, project settings. We haven't had to play with this too much, but down here on the bottom right, when I hit Control D, this is where it shows me all the settings for this specific project that I have open. So things like how many frames per second, that's important. If I'm animating a character at 24 frames a second versus 60, that would play a huge role in my stuff. Also things like key interpolation. Eventually we'll get more into this, but this is how when we set a keyframe, how does it know how fast to make that keyframe go? If you've had After Effects before, After Effects defaults to linear. I set a key and it's a straight line. Cinema defaults to spline, meaning it automatically eases in and eases out. So we don't have to do that automatically, okay? So there's other stuff inside here that we could also play with. So that's the file area, no big deal. Show search bar is Control F. So if you're over here and you hit Control F, inside this area, you could actually search for things. So let's say you had 1,000 items listed and you wanted to find that specific one. You could type in sphere, and it'll pull up any items that are named sphere or have sphere inside their name. So that could be very handy if you have a lot of items listed. Eventually, when we get to something like the drone, we're going to have groups inside groups inside groups inside groups. It makes it easier to grab stuff that way. Alt-G is the group stuff. We went through that last time, how to group stuff. Shift-G is just to expand things. So if you have, here's a cone and another cone, and another cone and another cone. So I grab all of these and I Alt-G to group them. If I Shift-G, it just pulls them out of that group. Okay, so sometimes you want to do that just to help you stay organized again. So that's what that one's going to do. New object as parent object. We're going to play with this one a lot today. So we've already used this one at least once. So we click this object before, like when we were building the chair and the desk, we click that, and what it does is it just creates an object. And what we want to do is take this object and drop it into here, and now that object is part of it, okay? Let me make a cube, because that cone doesn't do a good job of showing what that's doing. There we go. All right, so now this subdivision surface is the parent, and then this cube is a child. That's how they reference those things. So instead of me having to go up here and click this and then drag this into it, what I can do is if I just hold down Alt, that's what this one is saying, it'll make it, oops, I have to make sure I click it first. It'll make it automatically the parent, and then the other one is automatically the child. If I do it the opposite direction, where I hit Shift plus creating that, it'll swap the order. So now the one that's new is underneath this. Now some items need to be built underneath it. Some items will stay on top of it, okay? So for instance, subdivision surface underneath this does nothing. You can see that it looks exactly the same. But subdivision surface on the top of it makes it look rounded. It smooths it out. Under, I have to make this bigger. Under this menu here, where we have all of these things, these actually need to be created underneath it. So when I have the cube, it has to be underneath the cube for this to work. So I'm going to hold Shift, and I'll do a twist. Okay, and a twist is just something that allows us to control this. It didn't work. Hold on. I didn't have that selected probably. Twist. There we go. A twist allows us to actually like twist an object. So if we wanted it to, do that, it would do that. And the cool thing is you can always come back to this one and add some more divisions so that it stays nice and smooth. And all of these things under here, there's a whole lot of options inside this that you could really play with to create some cool stuff. Like before, we were doing bevels, and we were basically selecting edges and then adding bevels to it. You could add a bevel after the fact and do it as an object that you can then tweak. So if I click that cube again, hold Shift, and then go back here to bevel, now what it's going to do, I'm going to turn on my shading lines, is it's going to bevel all of those edges. And what's really neat about this is that I can come in here and specify different settings. So I can change my offset mode. I can change the amount of subdivisions. I could limit it so that it only hits certain spots. I could change the shape of it. Okay, so there's a lot that we could then do to this because now we're editing this kind of like after the fact, right? So it just makes it a lot easier. And then I can still go back to my original shape and get rid of all those original divisions, and I can still then tweak the bevel and still then tweak the twist, okay? So you'll find that this method allows us a little bit more workability from layer to layer, whereas if I were just to have hit C, grab the edges, rotated it, or add the bevel, those are kind of locked in and we can't tweak those after. You'll actually use some of these eventually to do some animation stuff where you could animate things moving around like that, which is pretty neat. Okay, so Alt creating or Shift creating an item is just where it's going to be placing it, whether it creates it above this. And this is also something that we could also, Alt click that. And so now we have a subdivision here, we have a cube, and we have these two. If you are ever unsure, make one and then just see how it falls. You can move it around if you need to. C is the make editable. So after we get to this point where we're like, hey, I really like that shape, I want to make this an editable object, we could hit C, and now that bakes in all of those settings. It just like locks it in. So now we have this cube that is nice and smooth and kind of twisted that we could then do something with. Yes, sir?
I think I remember this from the previous assignment we did. By pressing C, we were able to make some of the objects editable.
Yep, and that's something you're going to do for every assignment. We're going to have stuff that we're going to have to make editable so we can grab the points and the faces and move it around. Mirroring is just M. Why does that mean mirroring work? Mirror. Nope. And we're version 19 change that? I'll look in the mirror. That one should work. Um, Whoops. All right. Control Z is undo. So if I want to undo something, obviously Control Z lets me undo that, get back to the original shape. And then Control Y lets me redo. So if I want to go back, go forward, I can definitely do that. Get used to using these hotkeys and get used to using them pretty much with one hand. You'll notice that most hotkeys are on the left side of the keyboard for that specific reason, that they're meant to be your right hand stays on the mouse and your left hand does the hotkey, okay? So Control Z I can reach, Control Y I can reach. If I'm copying something, I can Control drag it and make a copy. Much easier than doing, in some of the other programs you have to hit an actual key command. Very quickly I can grab these and just Control drag it. It's very nice. And that works up here too. If I Control drag it here, that makes a copy as well, and then I can scoot that over. Picture viewer. So this is our picture viewer here. And this is a way for us to basically see what items look like before and what items look like after. If I have my items here, and then let's say I rotate it and I hit Control R or Shift R again, there's where they look like now. What I may want to do, instead of doing this, where I just hit the up and down arrow, I may want to hit A on one of these and B on the other one, and then Cinema will give me this line, and then I can actually use this little scrubbing line to compare it. Now the reason for this is that I may want to actually see a side-by-side view of what these two things look like. So here's a for instance. So I create a material and I drop it on this one. Actually, I'll just drop it on all of these. There we go. And let's say that I make this one blue like that, and then I go to its reflection and I choose Beckman, and I do that. Perfect. Okay, so let me just center this a bit. I'll hit Shift R and then I get my rendering. That looks awesome. But now I want to see, what does it look like if I did green? So I'm going to go back to my color. I'm going to choose green, hit Shift R again, and I say, well, I'm not sure. Do I like green? Do I like blue? Instead of doing this back and forth, I can just say A is here, B is there, and now I can see here are the two items. So I can see what does green look like versus what does blue look like. Which one do I like better? At the top of this, you can choose the direction, or swap them, so I'm swapping them there. I can make one a difference. Never had to use that. Swap the horizontal and vertical, so you can choose the direction that it's going. Typically, you might use this for something else, like let's say that I'm trying to really hone in on what reflective material looks like or what a glass looks like. You change some settings, sometimes it's very difficult to see the before and after, and so you want to be able to do that. Also, I can make any one of these A. So I can go all the way back to the beginning and make this one A, and make this bottom one B, and then still be able to cycle between them without deleting all these other ones. So it's very handy to do. If you have a movie inside here, you can hit the space bar and it'll actually play that sequence. So when we did our other one, where we had our rendered files coming out, we could hit the space bar and it would go through and play those. You can use the scroll wheel to zoom in, or you can just use plus and minus on the keyboard. And then there's a difference between Shift R, which is this one. Okay, that one opens the picture viewer. Control R renders it right inside here. So that's what this one is going to do. Okay, so Shift R opens the picture viewer and saves the image. Control R renders it right inside the view. Most of the time you're going to want to use Shift R because it allows you to save the image and it allows you to kind of zoom in and see some of those features. If I hit Control R, I can't zoom in because the second I hit Alt or try to zoom in, it goes away. Okay, so typically Shift R is what you're going to use. Animation, if we hit F8 on the keyboard, I can't because I'm recording something, but if you hit F8, it will go forward. If you hit F7, it would stop the animation. So that's just basically this button here, play and then stop. Go to the start of the animation is Shift F, and then end, Shift G. If you notice, Shift F and Shift G are right next to each other on the keyboard. So that makes your hotkeys a little bit easier, especially when you're trying to remember them. You can see like Shift F is right next to each other and Shift G is right next to each other. Go to previous key, go to next key. So if I grab this item and I set some keyframes here, I go up a bit and I set some more keyframes. Control F and Control G will jump between those two keyframes. This is important because when you're setting keyframes, you may come right there where the keyframe is not on, and then you may make some changes and then set a keyframe. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be a jump between those two keyframes that you may not want to happen. Okay, so that's why you want to use the Control G and Control F to jump to the keyframe, then make the change, and then reset your key. Okay, and then just G and F are go to next frame and previous frame. Just an easy way to be able to go through those frames to see what's happening. Transforming, we've gone through this. Move tool is E, rotate is R, and then scale is T. No big deal there. W will choose the axis that we're rotating or moving or whatever on. So let's say that I rotate this object, and then I switch to the move tool. See how this move tool is now pivoting this direction. Okay, if I want to move this again straight up, let me rotate that again. If I want to move this straight up, I can hit the W key, and what it does is it toggles between where the world's axis is and where the object's axis is. Okay, so when I rotated it, the object's axis rotated with it. So I can hit W, and now it's on the world axis. So again, something that's going to be very important, because as you start moving stuff and rotating things and getting them positioned, you may want to move it in a certain direction. This is going to help you out tremendously. You can see this one up here at the top. As I hit W, it's changing that mode right there. So that's the button for it. So if you're not sure which one you're on, you can definitely just look and see that's object and that's world, because it looks like a world. You've already kind of found this one on accident, the L key, which is that move axis button, right? So right now I'm moving the pivot point of this item. So I'm not moving the item itself. If I go to my rotate and rotate, it doesn't do anything. If I go to my scale and scale, for whatever reason, scale seems to do something. Yeah, it is weird, yeah. It shouldn't, because I'm still in that pivot mode. But if I hit L, now I'm out of that pivot mode, and now I'm back to just moving the object itself, okay? Which obviously in this case doesn't really help out. If we get to the point where we're like, I just want to reset the pivot, get it back to where it is, under Mesh, you can go to, where is that, Axis Center, and then you can say Axis Center, and then you can choose what you want to pivot to center this to. So I want to say center my axis to all the points. And it'll automatically take it and center it right to that object, okay? So Mesh, Axis Center, and then you can open this little pop-up box to choose where you want that center to be. Snap items. This is one of the things that I think Cinema really lacks in. It has a lot of snapping options for us to like lock things into certain spots. Like if I wanted to, let me just delete that one and these other ones here. Just keep one. So if I wanted to snap this item right to this grid point, typically I should have a hotkey, a single hotkey I can click that would do that. Cinema has to make you set it up first and then it works. So Shift-S turns on snapping. But you'll see that this isn't actually snapping to anything right now because I haven't set it up. So I need to go to this little magnet right here, and these are all the different things you can do for snapping, all the different ways you can set up how it snaps. I'm going to click this just to break it off so we can see them all. So in this case, I want to snap to my work plane, and I want to snap to the grid. So now, there it goes. You did it a second ago. Do it again. There you go. So now it's actually snapping the grid points. You can see as I get closer how it's like jumping to those points. Right there. Okay. So now that it's set up, now I can hit Shift-S to turn it off and Shift-S to turn it on, and it remembers those settings. But sometimes I want to snap to edges or polygons or vertices, and you have to keep going back into this menu. So that's what Shift-S does. And again, it's something that is very handy for lining things up. That's that. Increasing brush size. Inside of Cinema, there are these sculpting tools. So under the Sculpt menu here, under Brushes, there's all these different sculpting tools that we can use. There's also this, which is a live selection. Either way, we have a brush that we're using to select things. So if I use the brackets, you see that that brush gets bigger here and gets smaller there. So right bracket makes it bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. Do you know any other software that use that? Photoshop, right. Now, just as a point, swap these two around because these two are actually reversed. So that must have been a typo when I made that. So the right bracket makes it bigger, just like Photoshop does, and the left bracket makes it smaller. I wrote them backwards.
The right bracket decreases it?
The right bracket makes it bigger. Yep. So you can see here, very easily I can select a whole bunch of objects with this tool, or if I needed to, I can make that brush a lot smaller, and then select a smaller area at a time. Now there's also these sculpt tools, which again, eventually we'll get into using these more. But what the sculpt tools allow us to do is actually sculpt onto the surface. So if you look, I'm actually like deforming the surface here because I've used a pull brush and I'm pulling those pieces out. Fancy. Okay, and there's other ones like grab where I can just grab stuff and pull it. So typically if you're doing a character or you're doing something more organic, this is where this would come in because we want to kind of sculpt how that surface is looking. Nice. Okay, either way, that's what it works. If I hold down Shift with this one, it will smooth it out. So that way my points that I've like pulled out too far here, I can hold Shift and it'll do a nice little blend on them. Okay. It's just averaging it is what it's doing, right? So if I took these really far and then these really far and then these really far, and then I hold Shift, it's just averaging where those points are at, and that's all it's doing. If I hold Control, I invert my selection. Oops. Or I invert my tool. So if I go to Brushes here and I go to Pull, okay, doing this way, let me make it even more pressure. Doing this way, you can see it's pulling it upward. If I hold Control and I drag, it's pushing it in. Okay, so Control is just the opposite of that. That doesn't really affect, as far as I know, doesn't really affect that one. The only thing it would do is invert what I have selected. So if I have it selected, it would just deselect it. Okay, so as I'm selecting stuff with this one, I can hold Control and it'll deselect. If you hold Shift, Shift is a toggle, or not a toggle, but an add in this case. Okay, and then Control is a subtractor. Okay, so there's multiple uses. Eventually you'll get to play with some of those. Framing all is H. Let me make more objects in the scene so that makes more sense. There. Okay. So I'm zoomed in on, let's say, this item here. I hit H. It shows me all the items in my scene. If I want to go to one item, I hit O, and it'll zoom in on whatever item I have selected. Okay? Very important because usually what happens, especially in beginners, is we get lost. Where's my stuff? And then we don't know where anything went. And then some people will spend hours looking for their stuff. If you hit H, it'll show everything. If you can grab one object and hit O, it'll zoom right into it. Okay. We've already used the Alt left mouse, Alt middle mouse, and Alt right mouse button. So that's nothing crazy. F1 is our perspective view, which is what we're in. F2, F3, F4, and then F5 allow us to switch our camera views. So instead of us using the middle click and then middle clicking, you can use one of those hotkeys at the top. Okay? And that's it. Okay, so those are all of our major hotkeys that you will use throughout the course. Now these are here because these are the ones you'll typically use most, or the ones that are kind of easiest to get to. There are more of them, obviously, like the, let me grab some faces. Like all of those hotkeys, eventually you'll kind of go through and pick out the ones that you're using over and over and over again. Typically it's going to be extrude, typically it's going to be weld, or not weld, bevel, and typically it's going to be in the knife tool. Those are the typical ones you would use. Also some other ones, like if I'm constantly going back and forth between a tool, let me get rid of this surface and make something better. A tube. All right, so I'm going to just adjust the tube for a second. Inner radius goes out, like that, good, okay. So let's say that I wanted to switch between like the knife tool and something else. So I'm going to go to my edges, I'm going to go to my knife tool, and I'm going to insert an edge loop, insert an edge loop, insert an edge loop. Okay, so now let's say I want to switch back to a selection mode. I can just tap the space bar and it'll let me select stuff. Then I can tap the space bar again, it'll get me back to the knife tool. Okay, so whatever tool you were just in, you can use the space bar to get back to the selection tool and then do stuff. Okay, so I'll constantly use that too as a way just to quickly toggle so I don't have to, let's say, select and then hit KL again, and then hit select again, and then hit KL again. Okay, so those will be very handy tools for you to use throughout. More of them will pop up. The purpose of the hotkey sheet is not a definitive list, it's just something to kind of get a starting point. Also remember that any of these ones that have the letter at the end, that's their starting letter. So instead of us going up to display garage shading lines, you could just hit N and then hit B, right? So eventually you'll get to the point where it's just like you know what it is, NB. And it just makes it 10 times easier. Cool. And I believe too, window help, there it is. Where was that spot? Nope, I thought there was a spot where you could adjust the hotkeys. Maybe not. There it is, customization and menus. Nope, I lost where it was. I thought there was a spot where you can go through and adjust each hotkey. I might be thinking of something else. Cool. All right, any questions on the hotkey stuffs? Yes, sir.
When is the test?
In 2 weeks. So not this coming week, not the week after, but it'll be the week of the 12th. Most likely it'll be the 12th will be the hotkey test, and then the 19th will be the definitions test. Mm-hmm. Right.
Does that just invert your sculpting tools?
Yeah, so whatever you're trying to do on it, so let me go back to this, and let's put in some segments. That's way too many of that. There we go. So if I'm going to pull this item, and I really need to take the pressure up some so I can see it more. Okay, so this is just pulling it out. So if I hold that control key, it would just push it in.
Okay.
Yep, so it's just doing the opposite of what that one is. This one that's flatten, some of them it's not like flatten, the opposite of flatten is not really flattening it, but whatever. Like amplify will do more. I really need to crank this pressure up. Yeah. And some of them have more of an effect than others. Typically, like pull, you would use pull or push. Smooth doesn't roughen it out, just smooths it. Okay.